And rising cases of insecurity, a persistent blackout, and economic hardship facing the country dominated the headlines this week. Welcome to Standpoint. I am Precious Amayu. Now, the Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabu, on Tuesday threatened to revoke the licenses of electricity distribution companies over continued poor power supply nationwide. Mr. Adelabu made this threat via his X account after meeting with the chief executives of Abuja Electricity Distribution Company, AEDC, and Ibadan Electricity Distribution Company, IBEDC, and the managing director of the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN. According to the minister, it is disheartening to witness continued decline in power supply despite the concerted efforts to improve the situation. The tweet reads, quote, "As the Minister of Power, I am deeply concerned about the deteriorating electricity supply across the country. In response to this pressing issue, I have summoned the chief executives of Abuja Electricity Distribution Company and Ibadan Electricity Distribution Company, as well as the managing director of the Transmission Company of Nigeria, to a crucial meeting. This meeting aims to discuss the worsening power supply in their respective regions and collectively find lasting solutions," end quote. The minister went on to say, "Moving forward, I am committed to holding all distribution companies accountable for their performance. Willful non-performance will not be tolerated, and severe consequences, including license revocation, may be imposed," end quote. This tweet by the Minister of Power elicited a lot of reactions from Nigerians. And to discuss this issue extensively, Professor of Energy and Electricity Law, University of Lagos, Yemi Oke, joins me via Zoom. Good to have you join us, Prof.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be with you.
So the thinking of Nigerians is that by now, because of the promises that have been made in year out, that a power outage will be a thing, would be the exception and not the norm. So, Prof, talk to us about why we are still having this conversation, even after so many reforms, whether it was in 2004, 2005, 2011, and so many investments also made in that sector.
Well, it's a long way. It's a tortuous journey that we have traveled as a country in the power sector. Fundamentally, we haven't gotten it right in the power sector because of a whole lot of issues, ranging from the actual privatization itself and the entities that got on board in terms of both the generation companies and the distribution companies and so many other things. We've also had challenges with the regulatory aspect of it, which is crucial because once you privatize, of course, the main task of government is to bring on board effective, knowledge-based, prudent sector regulation. And then we have, of course, other issues relating to Nigeria as a polity. Even on the side of the consumers, we've had a series of theft by way of meter bypass and other petty theft in the power sector. And I said from inception, because I'm not tired, I can't be tired of pointing it out. Fundamentally, I think we got it wrong, the way and the manner the privatization was carried out. I guess too late to start to complain now. And I've always advocated for the fact that we need to take some difficult decision as a country. And I'm glad that the current administration hasn't shied away from taking some radical, difficult decisions for Nigeria to start working. That's why we have the power sector hasn't worked. And I mean, your guess is as good as mine. More than 10 years of actual privatization. We're still even generating about the same amount of megawatts we're generating, meaning we haven't really achieved much in terms of power sector. And we haven't seen noticeable trend of foreign direct investment in the power sector because, to be honest with you, the sector is not buoyant. And nobody wants to plunge his or her investment in the sector where the existing players are having difficulties recouping their investment now. And I mean, if in a situation where you have almost all, except for one or two of the discos being technically insolvent, that's not a sector that you want to plunge your investment if you're a prudent investor. And there are a whole lot of issues. Some we have documented Some were advocated. We've even suggested a way to get out of these rules that we've got ourselves in as a country. But it's never too late to start. And I can see the body language of the current administration. Everything points to the fact that the current administration is ready to get things done differently. And the basis or the reason for that is not far-fetched, because nature then, by divine prominence, the current president had experimented with this idea of getting it right in the power sector. Even as a governor in Lagos State, I always saw that example of Lagos Aaron that was forged because of federal might. And I want to kind of, in retrospect, ask the question, assuming we had allowed or supported, or assuming Nigeria as a country had allowed the Lagos Aaron project to see the light of day, by now we will not be talking of these challenges that we're talking about. Now that we're not starting to get the state involved, that the states should not try to generate, transmit, and distribute.
And Prof, we see how lackadaisical, there about the states are, even with the new electricity bill. Almost like, they're not interested in looking in that direction for now. But let's talk about the discos, because they are the ones that or at least some of them, are the ones that the minister is now summoning for a meeting. What you talked about something being fundamentally wrong with the privatization. On the side of the discos, what was fundamentally wrong?
That's an important question, and let me tell Nigerians again. I have spoken about it and I've written about it, and I stand by my position. The entities that bought those discos ordinarily shouldn't have been the one to have access to those discos. Why? Because power sector then was packaged as a political compromise for certain obvious reasons. And it saddens my heart because the last administration now of President Buhari, of course, you are aware of our advocacies, and they only acknowledge the fact that truly, in line with our position, power sector, particularly the discos, was sold as a matter of political patronage, because the indices are there. When they got these entities, money did not come in. There was no foreign direct investment for the discos, and I'm being honest with Nigerians. What they did was to approach Nigerian banks for all kinds of structured and syndicated lending, for what we call acquisition financing, meaning the money you put down to buy an asset. So the regulators and the players were not really keen about asking relevant questions as to, having bought, or if you are able to buy these entities, how do you take it forward? Because there was a lot of expectations as to power sector privatization. And they approached Nigerian banks, mopping up all the dollars in there. And of course, the banks also started having issues with their some of the banks exceeded their single obligor limits, meaning the maximum amount of money we could lend to an individual or a corporate entity. So they lend money to these entities. And then they were lending dollars at the rate of 161, 166 dollars to Naira. And these entities were to bill Nigerians in Naira. So simple mathematics. They have their debts to service, a lot of meter bypass. They have not increased the amount of megawatts that will be distributed to Nigerians. So they have to put their humongous cost around the 4,000 megawatts that they are distributing. Because if they are distributed, if they're going to distribute more, like 20,000 megawatts, they will spread the cost. Cost meaning cost of production, employee costs, all the costs, humongous costs, to give to their directors and what have you. They will be able to spread the cost over 20,000 megawatts or more. But now the costs are going to be spread around 3,000, 4,000 megawatts. That's a major challenge. Then dollars started going north while Naira started going south, meaning they will need to be adjusting electricity tariffs to keep pace with the foreign exchange, which you and I know the figures now. And an average Nigerian is not ready for consistent increase in electricity tariffs because they're not really getting value for it. And we won. And that was why 4 of the 5 banks we predicted actually caved in, because we expected 5 banks to go down the drain because of their needless exposure to the power sector. We won't. And we haven't done things differently. And I've said, for us to go out of this challenge that we have, there's no magician or magic, except we go via another round of reacquisition and refinancing, which will also involve government having to dilute some of their shares in the sector, the 40% stakes of the federal government. Of course, I can say the Minister of Finance and Minister of Finance Incorporated calling for the shares of the federal government in those discourse. Many things are about to be done. Of course, we heard recently the fraud in the Rural Electrification Agency, which we had advocated had no place in the law. It shouldn't be, even under the old law. Rural means rural. It was a kind of generation upgrade or distribution upgrade. That should ordinarily not have been a federal government concern. Even under the Constitution, before it was amended recently, it vests off-grid generation in the hands of the states. So rural electrification under the old electric power sector reform act and the unamended Constitution was for states and state assembly. So then we had federal monopolies or federal agencies by way of rural electrification fund, rural electrification agency, doing solarization at the level of the rural areas and communities. That's a misnomer. And we kicked against it alongside other like 200 errors in the old law. The law has been repealed. I was taken aback. I was disappointed that we still retain Rural Electrification Agency and Rural Electrification Fund in the new electricity act that we had. I'm even surprised that we retained HEMBET, Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, which was an interim measure until power sector become competitive. So we say, I mean, though the law isn't really bad compared to the one we had, the repeat law, the current law, because there's no perfect law anywhere in the world, I've found the current law had taken on board certain destructive components that wouldn't need as a nation.
And Prof, I will get to that, as we begin to, look at solutions in just a minute. But I wanted to talk to you because you mentioned tariff. And you said that, look, if the power supply, because Nigerians are not getting, that the power supply, you shouldn't be thinking of increasing tariff. But, there has been that conversation about power supply and the cost of operation, which should come first, almost like the chicken and the egg. The discourse are saying we need, our cost of operation is taking a hit without, increasing tariff. But Nigerians are saying we don't have power supply, so why should we be increasing tariff? How should this be addressed?
Let me, of course, I still want to talk about the position of the minister, which is important, which really was the flank of our discussion. But let me address the issue of tariff and adjustment in tariff. I think an average Nigerian will be willing and ready to pay slightly more for electricity if it's available, because at any rate, it will be cheaper than diesel and petrol. But getting Nigerians to pay for darkness is not legal, it's illegal. And we can't start to think seriously about tariff now. I've said this several times. Even under the repealed electric power sector reform act of 2005, we had PCAF, Power Consumer Assistance Fund. It was a pool of funds meant to mitigate hardship of any upward increase in electricity tariff. It targeted the poor. Under the current Electricity Act of 2003, PCAF is also retained gladly, meaning because the power sector, the law says it shouldn't be applied as direct subsidies, meaning that should ordinarily not be subsidies in the power sector. The only set of human beings or the only set of Nigerians who can be subsidized in the power sector are poor Nigerians, and that can only happen by PCAF. But we've been having subsidies in the power sector, and that's not prudent. When the current administration was thinking with the ideas, I supported that. We can't afford too many subsidies in the energy sector. We've had humongous subsidies in the petroleum sector. a lot of Nigerians are not aware that we have a lot of subsidies in the power sector until some of us started exposing it. And that's not prudent. The country is challenged. Let's face the fact, and we need to get Nigeria working again. So I said, Nigerians may be able to pay slightly for electricity, but whatever form of subsidy to help the poor must be given to the poor. You can't subsidize generation. There will be transmission losses, generation losses. By the time you are generating 5 megawatts, by the time it gets to Nigerians, it is 3,000 megawatts. And government will have subsidized 2,000 megawatts or less, about 1,000 megawatts of nothing that will go to the hands of commercial entities or to waste. And that wouldn't also get the discos and the gencos to be prudent because government is already paying for their losses anyway. Why would they want to be prudent? But if you are subsidizing actual consumption of Nigerians, whatever mathematics you want to deploy to get to the formula, then that's fine. And that's not new. In most countries of the world, they have direct subsidies to the poor. If you go to England, which example is readily available here and next door, you will see an average electricity bill indicating government subsidy of £20, £30, £50 in the electricity bill, meaning it is from the readings of an household that the subsidy gets to. Not subsidizing the gencos or the discos who you are simply telling them to be inefficient in their loss in their overhead and costs. And the factor in cost. There's a technical formula for that, which I don't like boring Nigerians with those formulas, but every cost of gas, cost of purchase, cost of staff, consultancy, gives to the directors, to the MDs, to all the managers, all the expensive lifestyles of the managers are factored in the cost of a tariff that they put to Nigerians because it's all part of production. And that's not prudent. And I challenge the regulator. So let me briefly go to the aspect of the minister. The minister, a good friend, is agitated because all is not well in the power sector. I didn't start with him. It also didn't start with the current administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is so passionate about getting the power sector to work, even as a governor years back. So you can imagine his level of enthusiasm in getting the power sector to work. And it's not working. I would blame the regulator. I think it's not appropriate for the minister to start to relate directly with the regulated entities. And I didn't comment in public, but somebody said, oh, it's not right because even the Minister of Finance will not summon Nigerian banks. Because you have a regulator in place. The government needs to take a back seat. Once you are privatized, you need effective, knowledge-based, patriotic, fearless, sincere person or group of persons to regulate, to get things working. That shouldn't be the concern of the federal government. So the appropriate agency or unit to interface with the discos and gencos and MBOT and every entity in the power sector is the regulator. So it's the regulator that will summon the discos or the gencos. It's the regulator that will revoke their licenses or threaten to revoke their licenses, put them on their toes and put them into compliance and do the right thing. And we've been having serious consistency of challenges in terms of regulation. And because
and Prof, I was going to ask you about that. You know, sorry to interrupt you. This challenge with regulation, and I like the example you gave earlier about, you know, the Minister of Finance now having to deal with banks when it's supposed to be the CBN, you know, who should do that job. So where is that gap in terms of, you know, regulation? Because the minister also said something which a lot of Nigerians would have found very shocking, is the issue of load rejection. When Nigerians need light, and yet, you know, you have discos who are engaging in load rejection. But I understand I have to go on break, Prof. When we return, I'll let you speak to that issue. You're watching Standpoint. We're talking about the challenges in the power sector. We'll take a break now and return with Prof. Stay with us. And thanks for staying with us. You're watching Standpoint. We're still looking at the challenges in the power sector and the summon, you know, of the Chairman, Chief Executive of Abuja Electricity Distribution Company, the IBEDC, that's Ibadan Electricity Distribution Company, and the Managing Director of the Transmission Company of Nigeria by the Minister of Power to address these issues. We've been speaking with Professor of Energy and Electricity Law, University of Lagos, Yemi. Prof, just before we took that break, I was asking you to speak to the gaps in the regulatory, aspect of the power sector, especially because the minister also talked about the fact that some of these discos are, engaging in load rejection.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we are being challenged in terms of knowledge-based regulation. And I'm speaking as a concerned Nigeria. I'm also not having light where I am, and I'm sweating. It has passed. Nobody's spared. I went to the head office of the disco, they were on diesel. So it's a national, even I'm sure sometimes they use generator in Nassau, in courts. So nobody is spared of this challenge. So it's a collective challenge because, as we have predicted, the power sector is about to collapse, if not already collapsed, on all of us together as a country, as a people. One, we've not been fortunate to have effective regulation. And that's sad, because when you're talking about, we've been having human beings at the level of regulation. A number of them, about 3 or 4 human beings have been there as the chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission and the entire body over the last 3 or 4 regimes that we've passed there since inception, the commission. When we talk of regulation, for instance, let's talk of the banking regulation, telecoms regulation. Government will not be able to do anything meaningful, a way of intervention, a way of policy, unless and until they get in place somebody who understands the sector and is able to frontally engage the stakeholders. We know ourselves in the power sector. Those who are doing the right thing, those who are not doing that. Those who are not doing the right. Once you have privatized your entity, as we did as a country, the only job of government is to ensure strong, effective, independent regulator. It will even regulate government entities. We haven't had the fortune of that. It's about laws and sector regulation. It's about law and regulatory issues. It's more of law, because it's the law that says you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do this, you don't do that. This regulation says do this, don't do this. And we ensure compliance. Even if you are going to do or deploy regulation in the area of engineering or safety, it's the law that will stipulate it. It's the policy that or regulatory instrument that will stipulate it. And you go and enforce. We need to zoom on the lens of governance on the entities, on the regulated entities. We haven't done that sufficiently. I would just simply say we've not had effective sector regulation in the power sector. At some point, I raised some questions. I said, hey, I felt challenged, and I said, even as an employee of the federal government in the University of Lagos, a memo could deploy someone knowledgeable about the sector there, even on the salary as a professor, to go and do the right thing there. This shouldn't be about job for the boys or girls. It's something that affects everybody until we fix that. Now you're talking of load rejection. Let me tell you what they're doing about load rejection, so that Nigerians will know. One, you can't store megawatts. Once megawatt is allocated to a particular disco, you must pay for it, you must sell it, make money. If you don't sell it, you are going to pay. If you sell it, you will pay. So the discos will now target areas where they have high ends, employees, VIs, islands, and the commercial areas where people can afford to pay any amount of money for megawatts. And they concentrate the division of megawatts in those areas because they are sure whatever bills or tariff they impose on them, they're going to give to you. And we've had a kind of tariff structure that is not democratic. We have tariffs for the poor, tariff for the rich. The rich can afford to pay 10 times of what an average Nigerian will not be able to pay, rather they get life. And we don't need that kind of segmentation in the country. So if they give them megawatts, meaning the discourse, technically they do their mathematics, knowing how much do we sell this, which areas will need this, and if the area where they can maximize their income wouldn't need more than 200 megawatts for that day, and they have 600, they will rather reject 300 because the remaining 300 or extra, once is sold at huge cost, each tariff structure to the high earner, the poor Nigerians will not be able to afford it. And it's not going to be good business to them. So they will just reject that, oh, we don't need this much, we need this little that you can sell to this
almost
rich
like power racketeering as well in that sector.
It's not almost like power racketeering.
It is power racketeering.
Power racketeering, hoarding, we call it megawatt hoarding.
I see why you were berating.
That's why Nigerians are being put in darkness. And somebody is there who want to regulate and they're not saying the same thing.
Exactly, Prof. I see why you're talking about the regulatory side and how they really need to do their job. There's a lot, that need to be said about the power sector.
The success of the power sector is 90% dependent on the
regulator.
Regulation. 90%.
I wish we had enough time to really analyze of this, all of these issues, because it looks like
anytime.
Absolutely, we'll have to bring you back.
Yes,
Prof. We'll have to bring you back because we really need to explore all of this chain of the power sector. Thank you so much for your time, Professor of Energy and Electricity Law, University of Lagos, Yemi.
Thanks for having me.